amongst the many things that I did over the course of the last week and a bit is I read the Australian Electoral Act or bits of it.
This is why we don't have you have time.
Maybe this is why, yeah, exactly. And so the reason I read it is because I had this thought. I had this thought, which is, we were talking about the Greens last week, and I thought the Greens, like, they're not an environmental party anymore. I mean, if their first thing that they say they'll do if they get into a minority government is recognise Palestine, and they've got all these policies about, waiving HEX fees, and
Yeah.
like they're more of a Marxist party, right, than
No,
a Greens party.
that's a
And I
bit of an
thought,
insult. That's a bit of an insult to Karl Marx, to be fair.
and so I thought, maybe this is misleading and deceptive conduct to say that they're, I mean, I don't think it really is, but like what I thought is, I wonder if it is in some way unlawful to misrepresent yourself as a political party. And so I went and read bits of the Australian Electoral Act, and I came across this section, I think it's 329 or something, which actually says, yeah, you cannot be misleading and deceptive in your advertising as a political party. And so that sounds promising. And so
Yeah.
I read more detail about it. And unfortunately, it turns out that firstly, it's only applicable in the period of time after an election is called, but before it's like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But secondly, it's been extremely narrowed down. And so the only things that really are considered to be deceptive, it's a criminal offense, by the way. The
Yeah.
only thing that's considered to be deceptive is like tricking people into casting a vote the wrong way.
Mhm.
Or in one example, basically they represented a candidate as belonging to a different party on signage.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
not okay. And in another one, they used like the purple colors of the AEC. So you can't, but the idea of very specifically the notion about misrepresenting policies or who you are or what you stand for, there is no restriction at all in lying about any of that stuff whatsoever. And the most interesting thing is, for one moment in time in the 1980s, there was a law that was passed that effectively took misleading and deceptive conduct in advertising and
Yeah.
applied it to political parties. And
Yeah.
do you know what happened to that bit of it was passed? And do you know what
Yeah.
happened to that bit of legislation?
Never got used.
It was repealed just before an election
Of course it
because
was.
federally every party panicked that their
Yeah.
opinion was going to be prosecuted criminally. And
Yeah.
so it was never used and no longer exists. And so basically, as a political party, you can represent your opinions and what you stand for in any way you like, and it cannot be unlawful.
Well, same reason, obviously, you can't get sued under parliamentary privilege, and you also can't get done under spam laws. Hence why you get spam before elections
Yeah.
wantonly. So it just shows that the politicians have run rule for themselves and run rule for everyone else. Speaking of which, we talked about scooters last week, if you recall. It was actually got some great feedback on the issue. And I know a guy called Marcus Pearl, councillor of Port Phillip, who's a fantastic councillor. And a shame there aren't a lot more politicians like Marcus, because he actually ran for Higgins and got very, very narrowly defeated by Katie Allen, who was the incumbent, essentially. It worked out for the best because they ended up getting rid of that. It looks like that seat's going to go. But Marcus, hopefully one day, gets a federal, because he's exactly the kind of, be it Liberal or Labor, exactly the kind of politician you want. A very successful CEO, outstanding business person, super sensible. Anyway, Port Phillip is, as a result, a very good council. I'm in Port Phillip, and he actually released a statement following the scooter stuff, and it basically said the City of Port Phillip has been blindsided by the City of Melbourne's actions. These councils have been working really collaboratively together. They border each other, and he went on, this lack of coordination is particularly troubling given the collaborative approach that brought Port Phillip into the trial in the first place. And he noted, this is a really interesting point, that the regulation of the trial ultimately falls under the state government. And whilst it respects each city's ability to make its own decision, the City of Port Phillip was under the impression that we were working in partnership with the City of Melbourne. Unfortunately, they've chosen to sever that partnership in bad faith. Interesting, there are no guarantees that the e-scooter providers will cease operation in the City of Melbourne, because really it comes down to the state government. So state government, I think, can override these idiots in the Melbourne Council. And also, just one other point, without getting feedback positive or negative, and some of Aaron Wood's sort of supporters who I mentioned, Aaron Wood was the challenger to Nick Rees, who came out basically saying he was going to ban it in the Hoddle grid. So he certainly wasn't as drastic as what Nick Rees was. So semi-apology to Aaron, because I don't agree with your policy, but we shouldn't be lumping in the same bucket as Nick Rees, the current mayor, who is just a disaster.
Who it was a Labor pre-selection candidate at one point. Labor aligned, definitely Nick Rees.
He was with Sally Caps. I'm not sure. I actually don't know. I think the alignment in council is always a bit hazy.
I thought he might have been. I'm happy to be corrected by this, but I thought, by the way, like the one interaction I've ever had with him was quite good, but many years ago. But I thought he was Labor aligned and may have run for pre-selection.
He certainly could be.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's not, but I think ultimately, I think the problem is Nick Rees, who was, I think, and he looked back on Sally Caps' reign, and I think people criticise it. Actually, in hindsight, a pretty good Lord Mayor, especially compared to this guy. But that is a moving feast, and clearly an issue that is impacting a lot of people who use scooters for transport, who can't afford cars, and this is a great way to get around, and a small number of people trying to prevent that.